And really, I'm just honored to be here tonight, and really want to thank all of you for coming out and seeing this exhibition, being here tonight, and being supportive of the museum. I want to especially take a moment to really thank Bob and Alice Jepson, who I got the pleasure of meeting upstairs a few minutes ago. And really, thanks from me and all of my staff, and I'm sure everyone here. You know, in our communities and in the West Coast, we've been fortunate to do a number of philanthropic things. Oftentimes we do that anonymously. There are other times when you step up and put your name to show where you stand about something. And you're taking this leadership role with the lead gift to create this museum. As I said, we're honored to be here, but without your leadership, we all wouldn't be in this fabulous design building. So really a deep thanks to both of you. And I want to also thank Lisa and all your staff here. You know, we've had actually 90 exhibitions at 72 museums, a few more, and you've just got an incredible staff. I'm just not saying this because we're here. Honestly, they've been so user-friendly and so thorough and so wonderful. I mean, Catherine Malone, our collections manager, Suzanne Orton, head of marketing, has just commented so often in the whole time we've been working with the staff that they've been incredible to work with, and Molly and Courtney and Harry, and I know I'm missing lots of other people, but on behalf of us who are fortunate to come here to Savannah, the Telfair Museum, we want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts for all the hard work you've done to make this show possible. So what I want to do, I want to break the comments into really three areas. One is a little bit about my history, how I got where I am. The second is about the exhibition, and then probably some thoughts about why art is so important. So with that, we'll start. And I also want to mention my old grade school friend, Betsy Warren, who just came here from Charleston. I don't want to get into the battle between Savannah and Charleston, but I'm delighted you drove down and grew up with her and her family, and they're leading arts and cultural supporters in the Northwest, and it's wonderful that you came down to spend a few hours with us. So thank you, Betsy. Okay, so with that, as this quote says, for me, waking up each day without art would be like waking up without the sun. I am fortunate that I grew up in a household filled with art. And how that happened is, next please. Next please. Next please. Okay, here I am at age 2. I throw a few of these in, so no matter how much I may fumble along, at least these pictures all the moms in the audience can relate to. I'm an only child, and next please. This is a picture of my mother. And when I went to first grade, she had some time on her hands, and she looked around for a program between 9 and noon, and the only one that she found that fit that time was the Portland Art Museum Art School. So lo and behold, she enrolled, and my father, next please, there I am with him, she started this whole art journey. She started coming home with canvases and pastels and oil paints, and she took over my little shop downstairs where I would make little wood aircraft carriers and birdhouses and things, but it began this journey. 3 years later, a number of the leading art teachers, who were the leading artists in the community, complained there was no contemporary art gallery in Portland. There was a rental sales gallery at the museum, and that was wonderful, but the artists wanted to show their work, and they wanted to also have a place to maybe sell some work. So there's a picture of the Portland Art Museum in 1960. Next, please. So she, with her mother, my grandmother, Helen Director, rented the cheapest space in town in a building called the Newmarket Theater, one of the oldest buildings in Portland that doesn't come close age-wise to the buildings you have here, okay? And it was $50 a month, this corner space, and in 1961 she opened the Fountain Gallery of Art, so named because right across the street is a fountain called the Skidmore Fountain that is famous because that's where a coin toss was made to name Portland. And so the next, please. This was the first opening of the Fountain Gallery of Art, and there's my mother and my grandmother. Next, please. These were some of the artists that were local Northwest artists, some from Seattle, Portland, a few from San Francisco. Okay, next, please. So I grew up, you remember that day and age when people smoked, huh? So I grew up going to art openings every month and meeting the artists, and I'd go on Saturdays and play with their kids, and she started bringing art to art home. But what's interesting, and this never dawned on me until actually a few months ago when I give these talks, next please, that when she and the artists were fixing the space up and painting the walls and sheetrocking and so forth, I was there that week before it opened up, and there was this funny cabinet over on one side with these little tiny drawers. And I couldn't figure out what kind of shirts or clothes you could store in this cabinet, so I went over and I pulled it out, and lo and behold, it was a print cabinet. And I'm looking down at this beautiful fuchsia-colored print, and my mother comes and is standing over my shoulder and says, "Well, do you like that?" And I said, "I think it's beautiful." She said, "Okay, then you can have it." Little did I know that it was by a world-class artist, Stanley Hayter, yay. But this is the first piece that I ever got, and interestingly enough, it was a work on paper. Now, as Lisa said a little bit ago, the first piece I actually bought is a study by Louie Bunce, who was a major teacher and art legend in our community and a fabulous artist. He, like many, had been in Paris with Picasso and all those folks, and he was just magical in the community. This was a small work about 8 by 10, a small study, and I saw it in 1965, and I asked my mother if I could buy it. It was $75, but with the family discount, it was $60, and I paid $5 a month. And as I've said, she always knew where she could foreclose because I was in the bedroom right next door to theirs, okay? And this is the first piece of art I ever bought, and it's in my dressing room at home, and I see it every morning, and I feel so lucky to have it. So she ran the gallery for 25 years and did an amazing job. She helped a lot of our law firms and businesses and banks and individuals realize the importance of supporting our local artists and having art in our homes and offices. And she's been amply recognized for that, and I'm so proud of her and even more appreciative of the joy that she gave me by getting me to have a passion for the arts. So after 25 years, she sort of turned the gallery over to a woman who'd worked for her for 12 years, and she wanted to spend more time with my father as he began his retirement, and she wanted to do more philanthropic things. I remember feeling, looking back, very adrift. As an only child, I think in some ways the gallery was almost like a sibling rival. I mean, my mother wasn't home at 3 o'clock with hot, fresh-baked chocolate chip cookies and milk. She'd fly out of the house at 8:30 in the morning before my father, and God, she'd fly in at 6, and she'd be on the phone at 10 o'clock at night dealing with an artist who had a toothache and calling a dentist friend and seeing if she could trade dental work for a painting and all those things that gallerists do. You know, a psychiatrist, financial manager, I mean, you name it. And I was feeling a bit adrift, not that I wasn't committed to continue buying art of our region, because I think we have some of the best artists anywhere in the Northwest, and I'm sure if I were in Savannah or I was in any other city, I'd feel that way about the local artists there. But I was on the board of the Portland Art Museum. As Lisa said, I've been on 30 boards and spent about a third of my time on civic activities all the time. And I came up from a Portland Art Museum board meeting, and there was an exhibition of contemporary prints and multiples of what I'll call the New York School. And I went in, and it was pretty neat. And I thought, this might be sort of fun. I'll continue my commitment to art of our region, but let's maybe go down to the Ogden Gallery, who co-curated the print show, and buy a few prints. And I went down, and I saw a fabulous little Frank Stella triangle piece, and there was a Jim Dine, a heart, skull, and a cross, and there was a Hockney, so we bought those, and before I left I saw a Frankenthaler look great, and another one, and I went back again the next week and bought a few more. So if you're wondering, well, where was I putting this stuff? Okay, come on. I had a mother who was an art dealer. So I was in the gallery a million times when Nanny and Bob Warren, Betsy's parents, might have come by and said, "Gee, Arlene, we love this Horiuchi or this Carl Morris, but we don't have any wall space." And the good merchant that she was, she'd say, "Gee, Nanny and Bob, if you love the work, don't pass it up. Buy it, rotate it, put it under your bed. Don't pass up an object that speaks to you just because you don't have some wall space." So I'd blown through wall space before I was out of college. So wall space wasn't the issue. And at the time, the prints and multiples were actually pretty affordable. The Japanese had run up the art market and then that crashed. And so they were within my budget, so I kept buying a few more and a few more. Well, I went to the University of Oregon, and I was on the Museum of Art Council, a support group to be like a board of trustees of the museum. And in 1995, the then director, David Robertson, said, "Boy, I understand you've got some prints." And I said, "Yes." And I had a little binder that I kept myself, nothing like the fancy database that Catherine Malone works, that, as I've said, I don't know how to operate. But I kept this binder, and I'd take a picture, cut out an image of the print that I bought and wrote down who it was by and the edition, whatever. And he came up and went through my little binder. I had about 300 prints, and he picked out 56 works. And I said, "Great." So several months later, I went down to Eugene and went to the museum where I'd already put on so many benefits and been so often. But when I walked in and saw the work, most of which had been in storage, few had come from the house, it was like walking into a room of friends. And even though I didn't know any of those artists, I think what it speaks to is when you're lucky enough to be surrounded by art, you develop a very intimate relationship with that work. No different than I'm sure all of you at a movie, you'll say, you know, gee, Meryl Streep or Brad Pitt or whomever, or you'll go to a basketball game or a football game and you'll be cheering for some athlete, that, you know, you develop a very intimate kind of relationship, and yet you don't know that person at all. Well, when you're lucky enough to have art around you, you develop that special relationship with that art, and it speaks to you every day, and you see it, you come home, whatever. So seeing that art in a bigger space with walls like most of us don't have at home, and curated by a man named Larry Fong in terms of how he arranged it, was magical. And I thought, it just doesn't get any better until people started coming in. And when people came in, they did all the things that you've all done, and hopefully the thousands of other people will do when they go to this exhibition. They smile, they frown, they puzzle, all the things we do when we experience art. But the real transformational moment came. There was an image by Robert Longo from a series called Men in the Cities. And this is a set where he took his models, and he got them into a room, and he wanted some odd images. So he got a tennis ball machine, and he started shooting tennis balls at them. And as you can imagine, if I asked some of you to stand up right now and act, you know, in an odd way, it seems so contrived. But if we had a tennis ball machine going at you, you'd be ducking and moving, and so he was very, very smart. And out of that, he got these images, one called Eric that's like this. So it's a big black and white print of this image called Eric. So I go on over to a man and his 8-year-old son, and the son's down here, and I scooted on down, and with the meniscus surgery I had 3 weeks ago, I can't quite do that. But, and I said to this young man, "What do you think's going on there? Is that guy dancing and rocking out, or is he twisting in pain and about to collapse?" Because that's what I see in those works. Now, let's think about it when you stubbed your toe and you're suddenly sitting there and you're in agony, got every pore in your body is thinking about, oh, your toe that you just stubbed, okay? Or think about when you have that brilliant sunset or that day at the beach or whatever, and you're just filled with such joy about being alive. So that's what I see in Robert Longo's work, that fine line when you were totally consumed emotionally, either with pain or with pleasure. So I scoot down next to that young man, and I ask him that question, and he, like most young people, you can hear the wheels turning, and I said, "What do you think?" And he says, "I think he's dancing." To which I said, like every single one of you would, and especially all you fabulous docents, "You're right." Because whatever he said, I would have said, "You're right." And the light really went off then. Now, Portland is a little bit bigger than Savannah, but like a lot of the cities in the West and the Midwest and the South, when you don't live in a New York or Chicago or one of the major cities that has giant museums, we tended not to grow up with a lot of contemporary art. And I thought, wouldn't it be neat if I married the passion I have for buying the art with a lending program to get the work to university and regional museums? So that's what led to this program where we've had these 92 exhibitions at 72 museums. And I just can't tell you the joy, as I've said, the joy I get from experiencing the art is only exceeded by the joy of sharing the art. Like any of you with any hobbies you may have, it's wonderful to have a passion, but when you're able to let others share it with you, it just adds to the joy. So really, I'm so indebted and appreciative of having all this work here. So this was the first, that was the first show at the University of Oregon. This was the next show we had, an Andy Warhol show called Dream America. Next. We've had Liechtenstein shows, we've had John Baldessari shows, a number of them. This is a list of all the places that we've had these exhibitions. Now you may ask, how does this actually happen? How do we have these exhibitions? Well, the way this show got here today, it was from the Joslin Art Museum. And about 3 years ago, I was eating at a club in Portland called the Artington Club, which is probably the equivalent of that Chatham Club here. And I saw the director of the Portland Art Museum, Brian Faricio. And I went over to say hello. We are close to the museum. We've done a number of things like the Jepsons have done here. And he said, I think you should meet Toby Jurovics, my lunch partner. And I said, hi, Toby, what do you do? And he says, I'm the contemporary curator at the Joslin Museum in Omaha, which I had not heard of, which doesn't mean much because there are lots of things, museums I haven't heard of. Brian said, well, Toby, you should go see what Jordan does with his collection. So Toby came over, saw what we did, and he said, now is this true? We can pick out whatever we want? Yes. And you'll loan it to us for free? Yes. And you'll ship it to us? Yes. And then you'll print out these brochures for free that we can't sell, we have to give out? Yes. And then you'll let us consider getting some money to bring kids in or seniors? Yes. He said, I think my director, Jack Becker, would like to talk to you. So Mr. Becker came out a couple weeks later and spent some time going through the binders and picked out a show called Under Pressure, which I think was a brilliant title because in essence prints are always, put on a plate and smash a piece of paper down. So we had that exhibition about 2.5 years ago at the Joslin Art Museum in Omaha and went out there, and like all of you, wonderful arts community, a Sir Norman Foster addition to an older city building, fabulous community, fabulous museum. And when he was arranging for the show, I said, well, I don't know museums in the Midwest. You must, have people there from the American Association of Museum Directors, and he called up and said, boy, here are a number of museums, the Wichita Museum. I said, that's great. Salt Lake, we'd had a show there. Missoula, I said, we'd had one in Bozeman, not Missoula. Bellevue, we've had a number of shows there. And then the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art decided they wanted it too. So it was so much fun working with them. Well, I guess we were pretty easy to work with because he called up and said, we want to do another one. So they came up with the name of Warhol in Living Color. And I said, again, will you talk to some folks? And that's when he called up, and that's how it got to the Telfair. So that's how this program all tends to happen. So this is a show of the Under Pressure show, actually at Missoula, where I'm addressing some kids and so forth. Next, please. Okay, let's talk about this exhibition, and so now you know how it got to be here. Now, earlier there was a screen that said, why art? I think this is the seminal message is, I love contemporary art. Why? Because it's art of my time and your time. Now, if you think about art, current art is always contemporary art. When Van Gogh was doing his work, when Matisse, Picasso, Renoir, Rembrandt, Durer, pick anyone you want. Art that's done during someone's lifetime is contemporary art. And what do artists do? What's their job? Artists are always chroniclers of our time. They're always the people that are in their art reflecting the themes, the mores, the issues, the political issues of the time. And just like editorial writers in the New York Times, they're dealing with those issues that sometimes make us uncomfortable because that's part of their job. And that's what they're doing. The second thing about artists is, it is tough. As I said earlier to the docents, every one of you, who in this room has not doodled on a piece of paper at some time, right? Every one of you, right? When you were kids, you took crayons and, your parents were trying to shut you up like I did with mine at the restaurant, right? Okay. So every one of us in this room is an artist. Everyone's an artist. Even if you get those paint by numbers boxes and you just fill the paint in, you're an artist. But to have Lisa and her team say that work is worthy enough to be at the Telfair, you've got to move on up to a whole nother level. No different than many of you play the piano or trumpet or whatever. You're musicians. Okay? But there are probably many fewer who are actually in a symphony or play professionally. So to be an artist, you've got to have some burning message inside you, some theme that you want to get out. And that theme's got to be strong enough that you have the guts to put your heart and soul on a piece of paper, canvas, sculpture, whatever the medium is, and put it out there for everyone to look at, gawk at, smile, frown. Okay? It's gutsy. But on top of that, you've got to be able to do it in a way that is different and hasn't been done. I give the analogy, let's say that, one of you comes to me and says, Rachel Wilson, right there, okay. Brilliant young bankruptcy attorney in town and teaches wills and estates at Armstrong College. I get that plug in right? Okay. And let's say you came to me and you said, Jordan, I want to write the next great American novel. And I said, great. And you said, would you mind reading it? The draft? I said, love to. And you came back a couple months later. And I read it, and you called up and said, what do you think? And I said, well, it's a great read. I love the storyline, the cadence of the sentences, wow. But you know, it reads an awful lot sort of like Hemingway. And you said, well, you know, I went online and I researched which author for the last 75, 80 years has continued to sell consistently, and by gosh, Hemingway was right at the top. Grissom, Ludlum, they come and go, whatever, but Hemingway. And so you emulated Hemingway's style. And I would say, well, you know what? There's that Harry's Bar that has that $50,000 a year competition for the best Hemingway knockoff, and you're probably going to win. But in terms of writing the next great American novel, we've already had a Hemingway. You've got to come up with your own style, your own theme of writing. So with these artists, it's tough because a lot of stuff's already been done. So what you see with these artists is each one of them is recognized because not only did they have a theme and a passion, but they did it in a way that hasn't been done. It doesn't matter whether someone says, boy, I could do something like this Josef Albers. It's an awful lot harder to get these colors to work than you think. But he did it first. Not that he put colors together, but in terms of his own style and his own way. So Josef Albers was the oldest artist in this exhibition, and he was born in Germany, was part of the Bauhaus movement, gets away from Germany before World War II, and he comes to the Black Mountain College, which was an experimental college that a lot of artists were at, brings his wife Annie Albers, who was a textile artist, wonderful couple, and he was there. He left before it then closed a few years later to go to Yale to head up their art program. So he was legendary in terms of his being a teacher, and all the artists that he influenced and taught just goes on and on and on. But if we look at his work, okay, what's he doing? Well, when I talked about artists having to do things differently, always I tend to think about, well, how old are they? Where'd they go to school? Who were the artists they were looking at? Who were the big artists right before they sort of came on the scene? Okay? And his work, okay, follows the work of the abstract expressionists, of the modernists, of all those people in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. Okay. And what did he do? He loved colors. He loved the dynamic of how you mix these colors up, a master colorist, how they speak to each other. He loved these geometric forms. And this is his brand. This is what he did, and he stayed true to it. And he worked it and worked it and worked it and worked it. Now, if you think about who he influenced, next please. Let's see, John Baldessari. I think we'll skip over John here with time here. He's an amazing conceptual artist, but let's keep going a sec. Well, let's go back a sec, okay? Okay, let's go back to John Baldessari. John Baldessari is 75 right now. John Baldessari grew up in National City, a working class suburb of San Diego. Italian family, grew vegetables in the backyard. His father would go buy houses that were being torn down, take the lumber, and John talks about how he'd sit on Saturdays pounding the nails out of the boards so his father could sell the boards for reclaimed lumber. Okay? His mother got him into taking piano lessons in the 6th grade. In the 7th grade, she says, well, you like piano? Maybe you should take some art classes. He says, okay. He takes some art classes, really loves it. Takes more art in high school, decides he wants to be an artist. Okay. Goes to UCSD, graduates, goes up to Berkeley, goes to CalArt, bounces around, comes back to San Diego, getting really frustrated. Isn't sure he can make a difference in the world being an artist. He doesn't have anything to do that summer. A friend is working at a juvenile detention facility and says, boy, we need an art teacher for the summer. What are you doing? He says, nothing. Okay, come on, work with us. He goes to the facility. The kids all bug him and say, Mr. Baldessari, give us the keys to the gym so we can go play basketball, even though it's off hours. He says, I'll make you a deal. I'll sneak you in the basketball gym if you come to my art class tomorrow. Okay, we'll come. They come the next day. He begins to see how he's transforming lives through his teaching art. He says, maybe this isn't so bad. Okay? So he has become the leading conceptual artist in the world, although he hates that term. Okay? What does that mean? He's less concerned about how he makes the art than he is the theme. And without going into all of his story, his first big show was in 1962 or 67, one of the two, at Nova Scotia College, and they invited him to an exhibition, but he didn't have the money to go there. So what did he do? He wrote out instructions, got a hold of some graduate students back there, and they gave him a room, and they wrote on the wall, I will not make any more boring art, 100 times on the wall. And he did a video and sent the video there. Okay? This is a guy that thinks outside the box all the time. You look at his work, the work's here, he takes faces, he covers them up with circles, he manipulates these things. Why? Why? Because the why is why he does it. I think he does it because he wants us to be stopped in our tracks, look at his work and say, what is going on here? This is crazy. And if we do that, he's won. He's gotten our attention for that moment to at least start thinking and pondering what's going on. Now, he, like all the artists, were influenced by other artists. So the set you have here, this repository, has lots of themes to it. But what I think he's really doing is paying homage to, next, Marcel Duchamp, who in 1917, way earlier, took these ordinary objects and he suddenly put them up as art. Of course, he was just derided by everybody. All the art critics thought he was crazy. Next picture of him. Okay, there he is. But he was starting to say, let's look at ordinary objects around us and the objects that you wouldn't think about as being art. A toilet, a urinal, or whatever. And, you know, there isn't a major museum in the world that doesn't have one of his and is lucky to have it. But John Baldessari, in that set you have up here, was paying homage to him, thinking of a theme because he was admiring Marcel Duchamp. As many artists do, they pay homage to other artists as to doing something, not copying them, but doing their own version of a theme that was done that they admire and in terms of respecting that artist. Next. Robert Gober is another amazing artist. There was a big show at the Modern Museum, a whole wing of his stuff, has done the same sort of thing with This is Three Urinals, and he does these, again, very strong conceptual pieces that make you just stop in your tracks. Okay. Next. Chuck Close. Let's talk about Chuck Close for a second. And there are a couple things I want to emphasize about Chuck Close. First is, it's a perfect segue to why I love works on paper. Now, etchings and prints have been around for 500 years. It's amazing at the auction houses. You can get a Rembrandt, a Durer, you get prints a couple hundred years old for not an awful lot of money. They're usually small, black and white, small etchings. But something amazing happened post-World War II. And it sort of percolated all around the country. And that was, there were some people starting in Los Angeles with a woman, June Wayne, who sort of realized, you know, I love being an artist, but maybe I'm not as good of an artist myself as I am at making art for others. So she started an institute called Tamarind, and her claim to fame is she wanted to create a program of training master printers, people who would specialize in printing and really push the techniques And then they would, in essence, graduate and maybe go to other places around the country and sort of begin to have a plethora of printing houses across the country. Suddenly, you had people like Catherine Brown, who graduated from Berkeley. She created Crown Point Press. Sidney Felsen and Stanley Grinstein in Los Angeles created Gemini. Okay, you had LULAE, and you had a number of these houses. Now they're flourishing, they're hundreds, but there are really probably about 20, 25 that are the leaders nationally. Now what's amazing about this is the following. When David Hockney did the series when Xerox machines came out, he did some works with Xerox images. And people all said, critics said, ugh, that's not art. Well, why not? And then when digital printing came out, Hockney again is the leader of that. He had a show last year in San Francisco and New York where he took an iPad with an app, and they're actually the video of him with an iPad with this thing called Paint, I think is the app, and he's going like this on his iPad, and suddenly then it blows up on the wall, and there's this amazing painting that sells for $750,000. I mean, amazing, amazing, brilliant artist. Okay? Well, the point is for me when I'm asked, what do I think about mediums, whatever an artist wants to use, I'm interested in their message. And whatever vehicle they want to use to get that message across, why should we deny them by saying, no, that's craft, not art, or that's not valid? So what happens here is artists can go to these publishing houses, like when Roy Lichtenstein went to Gemini and said to James Reed, the amazing master printer there for 33 years, hey, Jim, I want to put this shiny mylar on a big piece of paper. How am I going to get it to stick? Well, that's what James Reed and the staff there spent time doing. When Richard Serra went to James Reed and said, I want this thick, viscous kind of paint on these images. Well, they never had that before. James Reed's talked to me, he spent 9 months. He tried auto paint, he tried paint for airplanes, house paints, all sorts of combinations to come up with the kind of paint to fulfill the artist's desire to express themselves in a certain way. So what's fabulous about works on paper is post-World War II, technologically they've pushed the envelope and done things which never ever could have been done, and allow the artists like Chuck Close to do things for us to benefit in ways that are incredible. Now let's talk about Chuck Close in particular. He was born in Monroe, Washington, suburb of Seattle, very dyslexic. He also has another disease called aphasia where he cannot recognize faces. Agony reading about him being a young child. He got into magic to try to attract attention with his friends because he couldn't really do sports and whatever, but he got into art and it was a refuge for him. Now later, unfortunately, he had a back collapse and that's left him really being a paraplegic. He has the use of one hand, but he, after going to Yale, got into portraiture, and he is probably the foremost portrait artist of the world. Now, it's not that portrait artists are new, but here again, he took an existing concept of portraits and he put his own stamp on it and has made it his own. Now, what do I see in his works? Go to Lyle, or I think the work that's, go back or forward. No, back. Okay, back. Okay. So if you look at these works upstairs, what's amazing about these, and I wish I could hear the docents tomorrow taking some kids through so I could learn more, but when you stand back from it, it looks like a photograph. As you get closer and closer and closer to it, you start seeing paintings within paintings within paintings. Now, again, the theme I see in this is, boy, when we stand back, it looks like a photograph. And we just take it for granted. It's a photograph. It's an image. As we get closer, we see this Lyle or Alex really composed of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of parts. The message for me out of this, and each of you has your own message, is, you know, Jordan, slow it down. You know, people are made up of lots of little parts. And it's so easy to take each other for granted and sometimes not being forgiving enough or understanding enough about all the issues we're all dealing with all the time. Now back on the technological side, go back to the next image. What you see here is he works with Pace Prints and Two Palms Press in New York. And that Lyle, for instance, that we just saw, I think it's 149 runs of the press, meaning you put one color on at a time. It may be in 30 different places on it. You push the paper on the press, pull it out, it dries, and if it's 149 colors, that's got to go through 149 times. That takes 2-3 years to do. But for these publishing houses, an artist like this, let alone his physical condition, never would do these works. The most he's done is 246 runs. Okay, amazing. So part of this talk is about technologically what the publishing houses have done that I think just adds so much more to it. Another quick point on it is I'm often asked a question, well, someone will say, why don't you collect originals? And I'll say, well, and obviously this audience is too sophisticated, but I'll say, well, these are all limited edition originals. Okay, they do a plate, copper, stone, wood, whatever, and when the edition is done, they ruin the plate so no more can be done. These are all limited edition original prints. But do you mean, why don't I buy paintings by Chuck Close, or Warhol, or Lichtenstein? And they'll say, yeah. And I'll say, well, first of all, even if I had the money, which I don't, to spend 80 million, which was the last sale of a Warhol, which I think is sort of disgusting, unless you were the seller. What I say is that's already been done. We have amazing collections in this country. Eli Broad in Los Angeles, the Saatchi collection, the Meyerhoff collection that's going to the National Gallery, the Pinault, Arnaud, Ken Griffin in Chicago, Steve Cohn in Connecticut, and Don Fisher, late Don Fisher in San Francisco. And they all have major works by all these artists. But what's interesting is if you had the late Don Fisher and Eli Broad here, and you asked them, well, who has the best Lichtensteins, because they each had 4 or 5, they could argue among themselves. And who knows, they're both right. How lucky they are. And how lucky we are that they have those big collections that they're sharing with us. But when Lisa calls up and says, hey, you know, you talked about Lichtenstein, can we do a Lichtenstein show? I'd say, you bet. When do you want it here? It's all framed. We have 280 of the 480 works Lichtenstein did. We've got an early work in 1952. His last work, a Tel Aviv print he did in 76. Okay, and when do you want them? So I guess in terms of my collection, what I'm doing is it's less about having a big Warhol or a big Lichtenstein and more about building a public collection that helps educate and is available easily to museums like this. If this museum tried to mount a Lichtenstein show of his paintings, what they're selling now for 30 or 40 million bucks, even the Jepsons may not have enough money to pay for the insurance and the cost of getting all the work here. The point is that only the biggest museums can afford. When you've got $1 billion of art, think about the insurance costs now. Think about the handling. Think about the years it takes to go to people and borrow all that work. Okay. Now, thankfully, we have LACMA, the Met, the Modern Museum. I mean, we've got the giant museums that can do that, and they should. But for so many of the museums across the country, at least our collection is super available, free, and it's easy to get great work here. Okay, let's see. We better finish up here. Okay, let's go past Michelin Thomas. Okay. Anish Kapoor, these are works which they don't hit me thematically like the Warhol works, but they are just so lovely and so gorgeous, and they just suck me in. When you go upstairs and see those, this amazing British artist, magical. I mean, it's like a time machine for me. I look at these works and it's like I see the center of the earth. It's like I see time immemorial, all that has passed. Okay, now let's get to Warhol. There we go. Now, the theme of this show was Warhol in living color. And why did Jack Becker and Karen Campbell, the curator, pick that name for this exhibition? I think because in 100 years, when we're all here seeing the next exhibition, we'll look back and probably the critics will say that Picasso was the most important artist of the first half of the 20th century and Warhol was probably the most important of the second half. Why? If we go back to where I started about artists being chroniclers of our time, okay, he did it all. And he did it all in a way that is just as fresh and as important today as it was when these works were done. So let's go back and talk a little bit quickly about Andy Warhol. He was born in Pittsburgh in 1928. Very religious family, Byzantine church. He talks about going to church with his mother all day on Saturday and sitting in the pew looking up at a wall of 60, 80 small icons of Christ, Mary, all the different images. So begin to build now what was going through his mind. He's sitting there in church, bored as can be, looking up at image after image after image after image. Okay? Next, he was starstruck. Talks about when he was young, he used to just love all the movie star magazines. And in fact, he got sick and was in bed for 6-8 months, and he spent a lot of his time writing movie stars for autographs. And Shirley Temple sent one which he always treasured. Next big piece there, he was sort of enamored with Hollywood, with stars, with being in the limelight, okay? With the images that Tinseltown created. Okay? Next point, he gets into art in high school, loves art, wants to be an artist. Go back to his image, you're too quick here. Okay, he wants to be an artist. His mother says, hey Andy, and their name was Warhola. He changed that in 1948-49 when he was applying for work. But, you know, it's tough to make a living being an artist. So why don't you be a graphic artist? Because there's always work if you're a graphic artist. So he specialized at Carnegie Institute of Technology, now Carnegie Mellon in essence, in graphic arts. As soon as he graduates in 1949, he makes a beeline for New York and he never goes back. I mean, he goes back to Pittsburgh, but not much. Okay. And he got to be the most famous graphic artist in New York. He quickly got hired by Glamour magazine, and he did ads for shoes, for washing machines, but a lot of fashion, especially shoes. He did windows for Bloomingdale's and other stores, and he became quite well known in New York. And he was making the equivalent of today, a couple $100,000 a year, and he bought a townhouse, he was living well, and his mother shows up with a suitcase, live with him the rest of her life. Okay. But he's frustrated because inside him is this fine artist. So his first show was at like a bar, tavern, nothing sold, and he wants to be an artist, so there's a story about his going to Leo Castelli, who was the biggest dealer in New York then, and he takes him to his latest work and the theme of what he's going to do, and he shows it to Mr. Castelli and says, see, isn't this great? Mr. Castelli says, well, this interesting, this cartoon-like character with a bubble here with some words, but let me show you something, Mr. Warhol. And he goes in the back of his office and he brings out another canvas and he says, a young man named Roy Lichtenstein was here last month and this is what he's doing and I brought him on the gallery. So I don't need you. If you want to come on in here, you've got to do something else. He goes back and talks to his friend Henry Geldzahler, who was the most important curator of that whole time. And lo and behold, he comes up with his new themes. His first exhibition was in Los Angeles at the Ferris Gallery of soup cans. Only one sold for $100. In the end, Irving Blum, the owner, felt so badly and thought the set should be intact. He had to call the customer and say, I'm not letting you buy it, I'm buying it back from you. And Irving Blum kept the whole set, which he then sold for millions later, but anyway. The point is, Andy Warhol's work was not well accepted. People were saying, who's going to buy soup cans? Come on now. But he starts with these themes. Now, Andy Warhol is probably, if there's one word that describes him, it is that he wanted to break down the walls of the elitist art community. Sort of the walls of the Impressionist paintings and the haughty-taughty New York folks and so forth. He wanted to democratize art. He wanted to make it available for the public. And he wanted to create this message that art is all around us, not just in museums. So the technique that he used that's right here is silkscreen, which is the easiest of all these techniques. And he starts his themes. As we know, he ended up buying a building in New York that he named the Factory. He was quite a party goer, quite an observer, took 50,000 Polaroids all the time. He had a Polaroid camera with him, led quite an interesting lifestyle. He was gay, Studio 54. I mean, he was a fascinating, fascinating character. but as an artist, a brilliant observer of his time. So what did he do? Now let's go to Mao's. What he did is he would take one theme after another. And what I would suggest to you is these things just didn't happen. Very thoughtful, very methodical. I said earlier, artists are chroniclers of our time. Look at the themes during Andy Warhol's lifetime. So he graduates in 1949, gets to New York. What's happening post-World War II? You've got to go back in time. Servicemen are coming back from the war. Suburbs are exploding. Levittown's being built. And I would pose to you that the most important change then was the advent of TV. Remember, TV started going in people's homes right in the early 50s. Suddenly, instead of just a radio show on in the 30s or 40s, suddenly you have images in millions of houses across the country of that Chevrolet ad, ride the Chevrolet across the country, Clairol hair ads, Marlboro ads to smoke, washing machines, you name it. We have the whole movement of consumerism. Madison Avenue, there weren't really advertising agencies back in the 20s and 30s of any consequence, but look what happened starting in the 50s on. Look at all the research about how to manipulate people and get them to buy products. Huge change in society. We'd had movies that started in the early part of the century. Newspapers have been around for a few decades prior to that. And even though a movie screen in 1923 could have the same movie across 2,300 screens across the country, nothing like having 40 million TV sets across the country seeing that TV show. So what is Andy Warhol thinking about all that? The same thing with Roy Lichtenstein, Jasper Johns, all those people of that pop artist movement. They're trying to reflect the themes of people being bombarded by messages, and how does the individual maintain their identity amidst that barrage of information. We need them today because they thought there was a barrage of information then. Little do we know about what we have now. Okay. So what does he do about themes? Now you think about Mao for a second. Okay? If you had to pick the most dominant political leader of the world from post-World War II for the next 25 years, you might sit there and say, what about Kennedy? Well, Kennedy was there for a couple of years. Well, what about Roosevelt already died, Truman, Eisenhower, you can pick Churchill, I mean, you pick around the world, whatever. But Chairman Mao dominated that country longer than any political factor, political person. Horrible, terrible dictator, ruthless, millions of people were killed, purges, cultural revolution. So if you had to pick one person for that period of time that was the most dominant political figure, Mao. On top of that, okay, this image of Chairman Mao, Warhol would pick appropriated images, meaning images that were already in the public domain. This is the image from the little booklet of Chairman Mao's statements that every Chinese person had to have. Well, there were 900 million Chinese then. Plus it was on every wall of every office everywhere. So this was the most populated image of any image in the world during that time. So the fact he picked Mao as an image and a theme didn't just happen. He was picking this iconic image of the most important, maybe horrible, most important political leader for that whole time frame. Now it's ironic, next one, where it shows them all. Next, what's so ironic about this is that here you have Chairman Mao, the pure communist, hated capitalism, hated individual liberty, hated everything that we stand for in this country. And my God, here you have this wild-looking gay guy in New York working out of the factory, doing his image and manipulating it in a way that just mocked him in some ways. He must have gone crazy. And Andy Warhol took this image and he manipulated it with brilliant colors. Okay. And look at the statement he's making about Mao. I think what is fascinating about this image, and Marilyn will talk about and finish up with, is in the end, the way that Mao now is probably best remembered is through this image that Andy Warhol created of him. The irony of this monstrous person. Okay. But brilliant theme on Andy Warhol's part. Next, please. Now we have Marilyn, and we'll finish with this. Now, if you think about, again, post-World War II, This was when the heyday of the movie studios, taking someone and creating their persona. Look at the stories we've heard about all the Clark Gable, Rock Hudson, Marilyn, all those artists. Doesn't happen now. The artists are way too independent. My God, look at all the trouble all the actors and actresses get in, getting in and out of cars, doing all the stuff they do, the parties, you name it. I mean, we know everything about them all the time now, which probably isn't so great. But in those days, the studios actually controlled every aspect. They had them go out with certain people on dates to get publicity. They had to do this, that, home life, all this stuff, whatever. So he wants to comment on that. Who does he pick? I mean, he could have picked dozens of people. Who picks Marilyn? This image comes from the movie Niagara. Gene Corman took this publicity shot for that movie. He started these series 3 weeks before she died. Okay. And he picks her, I think, again, as an iconic image of a whole time and place that was relevant to that time in society. All the themes of the movie studios manipulating and creating a persona. And where, again, is the individual? Where's her identity? Where is she? And maybe ultimately what's so ironic here is all the legends about how she died, whether it was the Kennedys, suicide, all this stuff, whatever. In the end, maybe we, the public, that had such a thirst for everything about Marilyn Monroe, let alone all the actors and actresses now, maybe we drove her to where she couldn't live with the dichotomy between who she really was inside and this image that had been created about her. So again, Andy Warhol just isn't picking Marilyn out of the blue. Very thoughtful, brilliant, and ironically, if we think about Marilyn Monroe, who was an okay actress, not one of the greatest, now this image is probably one of the best known images in society. So ultimately, she's been immortalized by less what she did and more by the artist that was the chronicler of his time and used her as a theme. Brilliant. So let me finish with this. Back on that second slide about why art is important. Okay. The themes I've just talked about, and maybe some of this resonates with you. What's wonderful about the art, and I was mentioning this earlier, is each of us comes to look at art in our own eyes, our own unique experience. Why? Because look around the room. Look who you're sitting next to. Okay? Each of us had parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, friends, students, teachers, went to boarding camp, went to summer school, Boy Scouts, not this, hunts, fishes. I mean, all the myriad of experiences we each are. We're all uniquely different. So when each one of you walks up to any of these works, why wouldn't you each see in it something that's unique to you because you're a unique individual? And you're bringing everything you've ever been and experienced with you when you walk in this museum. That's why art is so critical and important. If Andy Warhol was responding and Roy Lichtenstein, all those folks about materialism and the advertising age and marketing and being bombarded, that's nothing compared to today. I forget those statistics, how many times a day we are hit with. It's like thousands, whatever it is. Okay? But that same search for who we are, what our values are, what's important to us, it's time immemorial. The Native Americans who were here long before us were having the same issues looking at the stars. It's just it's more complex today. So what I would pose and why all of you, and you're the choir, why these museums, why celebrating these artists is so important. It's because especially for the young people, and that's why that docent program is so fabulous here, is for these kids today, and I see it with my soon-to-be 16 this month and 18 next month old daughters. My God, they know everything that's going on with their friends, the Facebook, the Instagram, all that stuff that Suzanne Orton follows on all the social media. They're never alone. Okay? They're being told what to listen to, what to eat, where to go, where everybody is, what's going on instantly. Where is a refuge for them? For any of you that have kids, when we were growing up, you'd get in the car, your parents would take you on a trip, you'd be looking around all the time, maybe you'd be bored, right? For any of you who have taken your kids or grandkids or nieces, nephews, whatever, what do? They're buried in their phone the whole time. You say, look around, look. Okay. Art is more important than ever, especially for the young people. It's that last refuge where they can end up becoming whoever they want to be and taking that break. For us, it's the same refuge. So for those of you that support the arts, okay, just a hip, hip hooray to you and such an indebtedness. And lastly, I'll finish with this. It was... It's not so nice to complain about the host, about your introduction, but you were so nice in thanking me for having all the artwork here. But I don't want to reprimand you or contradict you in public, but let me just give you this little example. So, about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, we had a wonderful curator named Jennifer Farrell from the Art Museum at the University of Virginia campus come. And she was looking at doing a show, and she ended up picking a Jasper Johns exhibition. So she picked out about 40 works for a smaller space. We're now going to do a bigger Richard Serra show there, and actually she's now gone on to be the contemporary curator of works on paper at the Met. And she was, just like you are and your staff, so bright, so lovely, so knowledgeable, just a dream to have in the office. She spent 2-3 days. So when she was leaving, my office is right near the elevator at the front, and Catherine's is farther away, a few feet away, and she just couldn't stop thanking us. Thank you, this is so wonderful. Our audiences, the kids, our support groups, whatever, thank you. Oh my God. Okay, get on the elevator already. Okay. She was wonderful. So she finally gets on the elevator. Now I turn to Catherine Malone. So stand up 1 second, because stand up a second. Okay. She does such a wonderful job as collection manager, but I mean, she should be from the South because she is such a lady, okay? And she is so much fun to tease, okay? And she sets me up all the time, okay? So I just get kicked up. So I turned to Catherine Malone and I said, that Jennifer Farrell, she's such a fool. And Catherine looked at me like, wow, can you be so rude? And I said, she's a fool. Catherine said, what do you mean? I said, she was thanking us for loaning us the prints. She didn't get it. We just got her to loan us her museum for free. So, okay. All right. So really, from the bottom of my heart, we are honored that we're here, and I appreciate the thanking us. But you know, as I've said, we have 8,000 prints. I'm fortunate to be in a position to keep building up this public collection, but in essence, we serve you. And, you know, if we weren't getting this art out, to have all this work in storage would be disgusting. As I've said, if we did a big printout on a wall and I took a dart and I was blindfolded and just threw it, I'd feel so lucky to have any piece that dart landed on. I'd feel so blessed. The fact we're in a position to really have a lot more, if we didn't have this program, there'd be no sense to having all this. It would represent values that I wouldn't really respect. So we're so appreciative, and all I can ask and really beg of you is the art does not get worn out by too many eyes. So when you've got your nephews, your kids, your neighbors, whatever, okay, please, I beg of you, tell them to come on down to the museum. Tell them to come on in and see it. The only shame is when this show leaves in a few months is if every single person in this community hasn't had a chance to go through it. That's the only shame. And lastly, since I understand you rate the speaker, I'd appreciate your turning all of these in to me. Thank you.